All righty. Well, we are here live on YouTube. I'll share this link here just in a second. Ben, this is our first time to go live on YouTube. I'm here with Ben DuBose. You know him from USA Today, from ClutchFans, longtime reporter covering the Rockets. We're going to talk a little bit about the Rockets preseason opener win. They take this game 122-113 against the Atlanta Hawks. A lot to discuss about this game. Ben, first of all, how you doing?
Doing well. And Dave, I think the biggest takeaway for me relative to when we last saw the Rockets play a home game at Toyota Center, which was early May. So that's been 5 months, I think.
Yeah.
The guard number 4 looks a lot better than he did 5 months ago.
That was funny. You know, I was out there and we're talking about JD Davison and it was really interesting to me with the hair. It looked like Cam Whitmore was wearing Jalen Green's jersey, but I kept seeing Jalen Green. I guess it kind of reminds me of PJ Tucker and Mario Elliott a little bit, but I was seeing Jalen Green at times out there.
Well, and I'm very surprised that more people aren't talking about him because it's not easy to be MVP of the G League at 22 years old. And in terms of why didn't he play if he's that good, look at the Boston Celtics roster the last 2 seasons. It was loaded. So it is perfectly understandable as to why he didn't play. He was just 22 years old last year, so it's not like he's super old and was just doing it because he's a man amongst boys. No, he's still in his developmental range. It's not like he's a nobody prospect. This was a second-round pick in 22. Played high-level college basketball at Alabama. He's got the size. He can handle the ball. He's 6'3". He's pretty thick, 215. I guess the one critique you could have if you look at his G League numbers, he shot 48% overall, which is quite good for a guard. I think he was just 34% from 3, and he was sort of a volume guy. But again, if you're the star of your team, which he basically is for the main Celtics, you're going to be asked to do a little bit more. The point is, that's nitpicking. When you look at the macro and a guy who's putting up those numbers at 22 years old, and the only reason he's not playing in the G League is because the Celtics are stacked. I'm not saying you should expect him to necessarily be a rotation player day one. That might be a little bit aggressive for a two-way guy. But I don't know why more people aren't talking about him. Like, this is a guy who, if it wasn't the Rockets, I would be genuinely intrigued. Like, if I was doing a fantasy basketball league this year, and some team that, let's say, bottom third of the league didn't have a clear path to minutes, or minutes that we knew were spoken for, signed JD Davison, a guy who put up those numbers in the G League and was simply blocked by a loaded Boston team, especially in the backcourt. I think this is a guy that I would bet on that has a chance to go out, at least statistically, have a good year. And, you know, statistics are one thing, but then you listen to Ime Udoka, who just wrapped up his postgame. Ime talked about, he said this when I asked him at training camp on Saturday, he makes all the right decisions, referring to JD, and that they trust him on the pick and roll. He manipulates the defense. And this is a Rockets team that without Fred VanVleet has a clear void there with Reed Sheppard and Ben Thompson. There's still steps they need to take. Very much a work in progress there. And I'm sure we'll get into that. You know, I'm not saying based on one preseason game that you should all of a sudden go out and do custom JD Davison jerseys. I think for now you can just duct tape Davison over the green from last year's Jalen jerseys. But yeah, I think it's fair to have some optimism. I definitely want to see him more.
Yeah, and just to break down his game, 17 points today. I believe he was 6 of 9 from the field. Just double checking here, 5 of 7 from 3, which was really a shock. I think he was 33% from 3-point range.
And I want to say look up the turnovers. I think he had just 1, and he played 22 minutes. In contrast to, I looked up Reed and Amin had 3 each in about 20 minutes. Yeah. So again, nitpicking, no Kevin Durant, but JD being able to have the 4 assists, control the ball, in addition to making the threes. I just thought it was a very, steady game in which he played very high IQ basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, as you pointed out, over 25 points a game, was the G League MVP, 7 to 8 assists a game. What really stuck out to me today, even though I think the most notable thing was the threes, 5 of 7, but like he would make solid reads. Like he could see the floor and find the open guy. And I was really impressed with him today. Like I said, I don't know if he was like the number one story. Certainly Jabari stepped up at the very first quarter. Sengun really dominated the second. We'll talk about those things. But Davison really impressed me. I mean, I think he makes this team. I think he's and what was also notable, Ben, is he came in the first quarter, like with 2-3 minutes left in the game. left in the quarter.
Yeah.
And that to me really stuck out as well. Granted, I know Fred's out, KD's out, Dorian Finney-Smith is out, but it still was notable. I mean, this is a guy I think that Ime Udoka can probably lean on.
Yeah, I think it was JD and Josh Okogie that were the first non-Steven guys off the bench in the first quarter, and that spoke volumes. I mean, Josh is a guy I think people have talked about more because everybody knows his level of defense and how that can fit with an Ime Udoka team, and I think Jae'Sean Tate was resting today in addition to Kevin Durant, so that made it all the easier to slide Okogie up. And so Okogie's been on the radar a little bit because obviously the defense is there, and he did shoot 35% from three last year. So if that continues, then obviously there's a path to minutes there. But I think there's a path to minutes for JD as well. And I guess, we can go into the rest of the roster because I do think that what we saw from JD, it's an interesting juxtaposition when you look at some of the struggles they had early in the game, because I thought the first half, and really, the first half was when both teams were at the closest to full strength. Other than KD, the Rockets had most of their guys. I think the Hawks played pretty much everybody, right?
Yeah. Am I missing? They had Jalen.
They played
Johnson
Trey.
back.
They played Porzingis. They played Dyson Daniels, Reese Lachey. I think they had everybody.
Yeah, Okongwu. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, it was an interesting half in that the Rockets got very sticky in the first quarter. And then the second quarter, Sengun was incredible. I mean, let's not bury the lead anymore. Sengun looked like, quite frankly, better than an all-star, which is what he was last year. His touch seems to be back. He made both of hhis threes. I think both were from the top, right? Which was really encouraging.
Both from the top of the key, and he looked very comfortable doing it. I think
made all of his free throws too, by the way.
Yeah, so the box kept changing. I don't know if he was 7 of 7 or 9 of 9, but still, he. I think that is what sticks out to me. In the first quarter, he was pretty good. He didn't dominate or anything. They put Reese Shea on him in the second, and he just feasted on him. But for him to hit threes, that's different. Like, we already know Sengun will have games where he'll take advantage. He's good in the post and different things like that. The other thing about Sengun in this game, obviously, we don't have Fred VanVleet at all this year, but right from the beginning, first couple of possessions, Sengun, top of the key, face up, creation. That, to me, was notable. Like, they're going to be running that more. And I'm not talking about Shen Hub out of the post, get a double team, kick it out to three, but Sengun running it as almost like a point forward. And we saw him do that in Eurobasket. And I think we'll probably see that a lot more this year, especially with some of the struggles playmaking right now that the young players, Amen and Reed, are showing.
And what I thought was interesting is that, Sengun really got going. It felt like the floor opened up for him a little bit more when they went with the double big. We saw the lob he had to Clint Capella, which was really nice. He had some really strong minutes with Steven as well, which I think we're used to. But it felt a little bit like last year's team, which shouldn't be shocking without Kevin Durant, because if there's no KD, really, it's not that different than last year's team, in that the double big, more than anything, was a move to boost the offense. A lot of people think of the double big being, defensive because you have all these big bodies and theoretically you can control the paint, rebounds, yada, yada. But where it really helps is on the offensive end, because obviously you're able to crush the offensive glass, but it's also the screen setting. It's, in the case of Clint Capella now, a lob threat. And so it's able to sort of unlock more layers, or it makes the opposing defense have to account for more things, as opposed to if they play traditionally without Kevin Durant or whatever they had last year, they're so limited on the perimeter that things on the likes of Sengun get squeezed a little bit. And so I think that's what we saw tonight, is that when they went to the double big, the floor opened up a little bit more for Sengun. I know that sounds counterintuitive because you think going double big, it's going to be a floor spacing nightmare. Well, it's sort of the opposite, in that because there's more things the defense has to account for, the game tends to open up a little bit. Now, the flip side to that is that they really struggle defensively for a stretch in there, and it may not be their fault. I mean, it's the preseason. Nobody's going all out defensively anyway. And secondly, like, Atlanta has a lot of guys who can shoot threes. And so that's the one thing, especially if you don't have KD, so you're not as long as you would be otherwise in that zone. You're going to give up some looks from three. Atlanta was hitting them at a pretty high clip. And so that was sort of the trade-off. They looked really good on offense in the second quarter, but the defense slipped. The first quarter is sort of the reverse. They played really well defensively, but they couldn't get the offense going. And so I think, at least without KD, that's sort of the push and pull, is that, that double big can really unlock some things offensively and mitigate the weakness in terms of the playmaking. But then you are going to have some challenges defensively. And I think that's basically what we saw, because, the first quarter, they looked pretty good. They started without Kevin. It was Reed, Tari, Amen, Jabari, and Sengun. And I thought they functioned pretty well defensively. Reed was a little too handsy, got in foul trouble. But other than that, I mean, as you would expect with Reed, Tari, and Jabari all out there, they defended really well. It's just they really struggled to initiate offense. I thought they took way too long to get into their sets sometimes without a point guard. Maybe there were some nerves. Both Amen and Reed weren't quite as crisp with their handle as I would have liked. Now, the asterisk that you have to put on that is that when Kevin plays, the idea is that, the gravity, the attention that he draws will hopefully make it a little bit easier for guys like Amen and Reed to create. So that's the one nitpick. And, that's where JD Davison comes into play, is that within the confines of that specific weakness, JD is better right now, at least with what the Rockets ran on the court Monday night. Now, maybe it's different when Kevin is out there. I hope that's the case. But to me, as things were tonight, that's the balance that I think they're trying to find, is that you can go the double big and things look really crisp offensively, but then you have the obvious defensive challenges. Offensively, Sengun is going to be great no matter what, but the floor gets a little bit sticky, especially if those other guys like Reed aren't doing a whole lot. And at some point, you're going to have to look at some other options if he's not producing. Again, not trying to get too panicked after one game, but I think that's sort of what we saw.
Overall, just big picture. I mean, I'm excited about what we saw today for sure. I think, Sengun, just to highlight those numbers, he had 19 points in short order, 17 to 18 minutes. 15 of those points came in the second quarter when he kind of exploded. And he was creating. He had a couple of nice blocks coming up from behind as well. But again, to me, the most notable thing with those 2 threes, because he's very comfortable taking them. Sengun doesn't have to be a 40% three-point shooter. He just needs to be comfortable taking them.
Yes.
In that, if that's the case, players have to come out on him, and then he's effective going to the basket. It's just going to open things up tremendously. It's what I've wanted to see from him forever. So I'm hoping that this is real, because we saw it certainly in Eurobasket. I do worry a little bit because you lost Fred, who is, for all his strengths and weaknesses, it's the low turnovers that Fred is so good at, his experience and everything. I think with Sengun, Amen, and Reed doing a lot of that creation, you're going to have to be a little bit more efficient offensively overall, because I do think you're going to have more turnovers this year. All 3 of them are fairly inexperienced as far as, running it as a point necessarily. They're all good in different ways, but I think that's going to be something to watch for this year.
Also, one other guy that I was a little bit underwhelmed by, I mentioned JD having some positives relative to Reed. I also thought JD had some positives relative to Josh Okogie. When you look at some of the breakdowns they had, I thought Okogie was overly aggressive, and he got beaten backdoor, especially in that first half a few times. And so JD, you would think a guy that's trying to get real NBA minutes for the first time might be trying to do too much, but on both ends of the court, he seemed to play within himself. That's something you heard from Ime Udoka, that, not only offensively did he like the control that he plays with, but defensively, because of his body, because of how thick he is in the upper body, he's able to guard 2s as well. And so I thought that stood out as well. Like, I did think JD was a better defender than Reed, which you would expect, given that Reed's a little bit light and he's still trying to figure out, when he can get those steals. Too often tonight, he had his cans in the cookie jar, and just, offensive players in the NBA are just too smart. I think Reed can adjust back. But for a guy as young as Reed is and without much experience, I thought they took advantage of him. They did for large stretches of last year as well in the limited minutes that he got. But I thought JD looked better than Josh Okogie on the defensive end as well, which sort of surprised me. So we'll see how much they adjust between games. But I really thought, outside of the core guys, JD was the biggest bright spot. Keeping with the theme of the first half, it was a really good start to the game for Jabari Smith Jr. And then, you look at the overall box score, 9 points, 6 rebounds, I think 3 of 8 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. And so a lot of the, at least statistically, production came very early in the game. But I thought this was a really good game for him. I thought he got to his spots. Quite frankly, I think he looked much more comfortable getting to exactly where he wanted to go and going up and rising and firing. He just missed the shots. It wasn't like too often in his first 3 years when, for one reason or another, he's been a little bit too light, or it's the handle's a little clunky, and so it just doesn't look. No, to me, it looked very fluid tonight. It looked real, and there's a world where if he hits a couple of those middies, we're talking about him being, other than Sengun, the star of the game, because he puts up 15 or 13 points on good efficiency. So I know the stat line is sort of hit or miss, obviously small sample size because nobody played more than, 20, 25 minutes in a preseason game. But I thought this was a really encouraging game for Jabari. He had some good shots that didn't go in, but other than that, I feel like on both ends of the floor, he was where he needed to be.
Yeah, I just want Jabari to find his spots, and get his shots within the flow of the offense. I thought early on, Sengun, very at the beginning of the game, read the double team perfectly. I think Porzingis closed on him, left Jabari open in the corner. That's the first basket the Rockets made, was that Jabari corner three. I do want to play this clip. I've never done this. We're going to have to test it out real quick, but I want to play this clip of Jabari, the move that I'm sure was coming, but that when he went past Kennard and then threw this dunk down. Hopefully the audio isn't too loud, but I'll just play it and just get your thoughts on it real quick.
Huge acquisition, and until Finney Smith gets back, he's got a real opportunity for minutes. Had an excellent training camp.
See, this to me, we'll wait till the audio. I don't know if the audio, like I said, is playing or not, but we'll find out.
I think it was.
Okay, good. I had adjusted the volume, but when I tested it earlier, I didn't know if it just cranks it up regardless. But, it's against Kennard. This is not like the greatest defender, but he brought the ball up the entire way, worked the ball basically there to the left, went right around him, basically with a little bit of a fake move. Jabari's not the greatest ball handler, but you can tell from where he was as a rookie, he has developed quite a bit. You've heard the same things. I've heard the same things. This guy really busted it in the offseason. He's not alone. Reed, Amen, Sengun all had great off seasons, but they really have raved about what Jabari Smith Jr. has done. He had that strong first quarter, 8 points. I don't think he scored the rest of the game. I could be wrong. I think he took a few shots that I liked, but just like you said, missed them. I'm just liking what I'm seeing from Jabari so far. We'll see how this plays out, but I think we're going to see an improved Jabari this year.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. And I also like in the second half what we saw from Tari. I mean, again, it's so tough to sort of project out, besides the obvious one exhibition, the caveats you can throw out with sample size and people not really going all out by any stretch of the imagination. I do want to see a little bit more from Tari as a creator, because I actually thought he was the guy who seemed to have the most craft on his finishes tonight. Especially in the second half, he had some drives that I thought looked really encouraging. And so, we've heard throughout camp all this talk that he wants more minutes, more of an opportunity, more plays run for him. In the first half, for whatever reason, I thought he was a little bit timid. It wasn't that he looked bad. I thought, Reed and Amen looked a little bit indecisive at times. With Amen, it looked to me sometimes like, he would go up with a plan to kick it to the corner, and sometimes those defenders for the Hawks sort of read his intention, and so he would think when he went up that a Reed was going to be there, and then ultimately it wasn't, because they anticipated that he wasn't really looking for that shot on the drive. Maybe that changes in the regular season when he's more willing to sort of throw his body around and absorb contact. You can certainly hope for that. For whatever reason, I thought Tari was a little unassertive in the first half. I thought that changed in the 6 or so minutes that he played to start the third quarter, and I thought he looked pretty good. And so that's what I like to see more. I think this is potentially a contract preseason for Tari. I mean, this is the last time that he can, make a case to Rafael Stone in the front office to get an extension before that deadline 2 weeks from today. Monday the 20th, I believe, is the deadline, or he goes into restricted free agency next summer. So I would like to see Tari have a big preseason. I think he would like to as well. I thought what little we saw from him today looked good. Just for whatever reason, he wasn't very I didn't think he was all that assertive. That surprised me a little bit. I would suspect it changes over the next couple of games.
And we're not going to see Tari and Adams for the next game, right? I think they're sitting out this one.
That's what they said. However, I am sort of keeping an eye open, because they also said that Kevin Durant would be available for all 4 games, and then he wasn't. So I think the only things that are set in stone are that the 2 games next week will be the dress rehearsals. because those are the closest to the regular season. They've had a little bit more time to build guys up. I think everything this week is sort of touch and go, and that they see how everybody plays or everybody feels going into, practice or shoot around, whatever it is on a given day, and then adjust accordingly. So I know they said Tari and Steven wouldn't be available. I take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, at least with Tari. Now with Steven at his age and mileage, yeah, I think that's a safe bet. But if Tari bounces back well and he wants to prove that he's no longer restricted, it wouldn't shock me if he ended up playing Wednesday.
Yeah, I was a little frustrated about KD not playing. I mean, it's not a big deal. I'm not losing my mind. I know, like David Weiner, Beam of Thug, was at the game. He was all pumped up about seeing KD play, getting tickets for this particular game. But it is what it is. You got to be careful. He just turned 37 years old. It's an important year. You're a contender now, and so you do have to be careful. I just expected that first game, him to come out and show us something. Hopefully, we'll see him here for the next one. I know you talked a little bit about Reed. I want to ask you about him. There were some nice plays from Reed in the game. There was one in the second quarter where, he was bringing the ball back up, I think around the nail area and kind of jumped without knowing where he was passing to, threw it out of bounds. I think that there's going to still be some of those growing pains with him. He still feels like, I think he's going to be good. So I'm not in any way knocking Reed. I just think that he's just being put in a situation that I don't know if he's quite ready for yet. Now I will say, and I'm sure you will agree, Rockets have been consistent about how good he looks. They've been saying it since before they drafted him, when they drafted him last year, this year. They love Reed Sheppard. They believe in him highly. So I trust the Rockets. They felt this way about Amen Thompson, and I believe they've been proven right so far. I want to believe him on Reed Sheppard as well. So it's early. I think we're just going to see some of that stuff, which is tough for a contender. You're going to probably see some turnovers this year that you don't like.
Yeah, and he's going to get into foul trouble defensively. It just is what it is, because at his height and weight, for him to be impactful defensively, he has to get some steals and blocks. Well, if you're trying to get steals and blocks at his lack of experience, you're going to get some fouls too. It just is what it is, especially with bigger defenders trying to hunt him in the post. And the hope is that he wins enough to where you just live with, the foul trouble that he gets himself into on occasion. So I will say with Reed, it wasn't a great game by any means, but I do think you need to wait on Kevin Durant before you form any substantive conclusions, because what they asked Reed to do tonight, we know he's at a disadvantage on defense for obvious reasons. Offensively, I think for someone of his profile, you generally want one of two things. So ideally, you'd bring him off the bench and you're going up against backups. Obviously, that's not happening right now with the Fred injury. We'll see what they decide with the starting lineup on opening night. And if it's not against backups, then you want at least him to have several other top shelf playmakers next to him so that he's maybe getting the weakest defender on the other team. And that really wasn't the case tonight without Kevin Durant. And I think, Amen had a little bit of an underwhelming game on offense, although the more I think about it with Amen, it's like what I said a few minutes ago. I think a lot of Amen's game is sort of conditional on being able to, absorb contact and finish through awkward angles at the rim, and you're not really going to want to put your body through that type of pounding in a preseason game. And so in some ways, it sort of reminds me of how, you remember at the end of last season when Jalen Green would be absolutely terrible in these, these playing out the string games late in seasons. I think it's sort of the same deal with Amen, and that when you're talking about a guy who's so dependent on using that burst and, twisting his body to finish through NBA level bigs at or near the rim, a lot of that depends on being willing to absorb contact. And you're not necessarily going to want to do that in a game where nothing matters, and you just want to make sure that nothing bad happens from an injury perspective. So I think that's a little bit of what happened with the men tonight. I mentioned on some of his drives, it looked like, the defenders for the Hawks were sort of anticipating they wouldn't try to finish, and so trying to read him for the pass. But where that plays into Reed is that if Sengun is really the only high-level playmaker out there, then Reed's not going to have the advantage of drawing the weakest defender. And so if he's going up against NBA-level starters, and this is a good Atlanta team that I think they're probably going to make the playoffs in the East.
I agree. They are good. Yeah. Jalen Johnson's good.
It's a good team. And so I think with Reed being as young as he is and having the deficiencies in terms of size and defense, you need to give him some training wheels in some way. And ideally, the training wheels would have been coming off the bench and sort of just gradually building him up the way a lot of young players are sort of handled around the NBA. That may not be a luxury the Rockets can afford this year, depending on what their other options are for the starting lineup. But if not that, then I think the hope is that, hey, when you have KD, Sengun, and Amen all clicking, then that's going to draw enough attention to where Reed can get going out of some really advantaged scenarios. So for people down on Reed, I see someone in the comments saying Reed ain't it. I get it. It wasn't a great game, but I would wait to see how he looks when the Rockets are closer to full strength, because I think the idea is that he should look better once they have other guys that can draw more attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap up, I know Tony had asked this question just on YouTube. Says, is this something you're going to be doing throughout the season? And yeah, Ben and I hope to do some of these after games, certainly, just to sort of, recap what we saw. We've been doing playback, and you guys are certainly very familiar with that, and we'll see how that goes. But I just want to be able to do a little bit more analysis and things that we saw and noticed, taking notes throughout the game and stuff. So we'll see how this goes this year. We're still looking forward to KD's first game with the Rockets. And, the Rockets looked pretty good offensively today and missing probably their best, most efficient scorer, let's say. I'm really looking forward to this season. I think it's going to be fun. There's a lot to like about the Rockets. It's unfortunate about Fred. They're holding out hope he could come back at the end of the year, but I'm not too,
I wouldn't count on it.
Optimistic about that exactly. But they still have a team that, in my opinion, is top four worthy in the West, and that's a great place to be, as strong as the West is, if not a little bit higher.
And by the way, I will say, if Fred doesn't come back, so, there's two scenarios. The one where he beats the odds and somehow he's back by April. If he's not, I think it is extremely likely that he will opt in and use his player option. I don't think he'll want to enter free agency coming off an ACL tear and without having any production on his ledger in a year, especially because last year was sort of a down year for him statistically. There were reasons for that. He had the bad ankle sprain, yada, yada. But I don't think Fred would decline a 1-year, $25 million deal, especially because we all know he wants to be here coming off an ACL tear. So one way or another, Fred is going to be back. And so that's why I also think Reed, is going to get a little bit of a longer leash, because in a perfect world, I do think they would want to run lineups with more long-term sustainability. So obviously they hope Reed develops into a starting level point guard in the NBA. I think they view Fred as already being one, and he should be back next year. If he doesn't come back this year, I think it's very likely he'll come back next year because he'll opt in for that player option. And so I do think if it's close with regards to the lineups, you might see them err on the side of something a little more traditional, simply because they are eventually going to have a more prototypical point guard out there, be it Reed or Fred.
Yeah. And we'll save this particular conversation for another time, but Fred is such an important player to this team, kind of irreplaceable for what he does. Reed is certainly being groomed for that position down the line, probably not ready right now, but he was sort of irreplaceable. And then now there's that question of whether is he a contract to be traded. Like I said, we could save that conversation for another time, but
because I think that's conditional on how they play in the first, 40 to 50 games. But yeah, there's absolutely a world where it could happen. And yeah, to the question about doing this, we'll do this after some games, maybe not after the West Coast games that are over at,
exactly.
God, there's some 10 PM starts this year. They'll be over at like 1 AM. But yeah, we'll do it after some games. And like, we could also, we'll see what, schedules allow for, but we could also do it on a day between games and, go live on on an off day, responding to, maybe there's interesting stuff at practice. Maybe it's, a big week for discussions amongst the fan base. And so you guys can pop in the chat and ask us, or, maybe there's a way you can have other people hop on. I mean, there's lots of options, but yeah, the bottom line, I think we both want to be more interactive this year. This should be a season that, it is a season that is more anticipated than any in some time. So yeah, we definitely want to be a part of it.
Absolutely. Going to be a really fun year. Ben, appreciate you doing this, and everybody in the chat and watching live. Appreciate all of you, for supporting, and we'll be back soon. Rockets 1-0 in the preseason, moving on to the next game, and we'll hopefully see Kevin Durant make his preseason Rockets debut here for game 2. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.